So anyway, I said, you know, it's not a mark I'm very proud of because I had gotten 78 and a half, and I honestly thought I had done like 85, 90, but clearly I hadn't. And so then because I was upset about my mark, and I had only had an hour's sleep because we had just come back the night before from a train trip that was like 20 hours long, and I was tired. And so then the tears started rolling down my face. Anyway, I ended up getting an A+ in that course. I got the highest mark on the assignment that he gave, and I got the highest mark on the final that he gave. I got 93 and a half. So he likes to use me as an example of, don't be discouraged if what you got on the midterm is not what you want. If you do the homework questions and you do the work, you can do fine on this course. Most of you are not in this for a credit, like to transfer to something else where the mark itself actually needs to be X for it to be worth something. It's for a certificate or whatever. So, I mean, it's personal satisfaction. For me, I'm not happy unless I get an A+ on a course that I think I should be able to get an A+ on. But, you know, there are courses I've gotten C+ on that I just didn't get that material. So there's no, you know, it's not the end of the world if you didn't get the mark you want on the midterm, but on the whole, I thought most of you did really well. Actually, not even most of you. I thought you all did great. So really good job studying for that exam. I did, however, bring up my prof because one of the things he did that I was really upset about was he took marks off my midterm because I hadn't shown my work. And I phoned him and I talked to him on Friday because I was trying to figure out how to, it's harder in a group of 10 to be consistent actually than it is when you have a group of 80. So you want to be really, really sure that you're consistently marking. And I talked to him about this taking marks off for not showing your work. And of course he laughed because I was mad when I was on the other end of that. But I said to him, I had to take marks off for people that got the total answer, but the question was so simple that the point was to show me how you got those numbers. So if you didn't show me those numbers, like I had said in class, if I ask you to calculate something for me, I want to see 1 times 0 is 0. I don't care if it's 0. I don't care if the answer is 1. I don't care if the answer is like obvious. You have to show me your work. And he said that on his exams, and I'm going to do this on the final, is he writes on the bottom of every single page, show your work. And he writes on the cover page, up to 50% of the marks will be deducted if you don't show your work in any question. So I just want you guys to get the idea. It's really hard for me to know if you know the concept if you don't show me the work. If you only tell me what the answer is, I have to guess. And that's not fair to the other people who have shown me their work. And he had a very interesting take on that too. He said it's almost like, he said really it's like cheating. And I said, how do you justify that as cheating? And he said, well, the student that's writing down all the work, it will take them, say, 2 minutes longer. He said, so the student that's not showing their work has stolen 2 more minutes to write the exam. So they end up getting more time to write it because they're not writing down what I've asked for. So over the course of a 3-hour exam, you can steal a lot of time by not showing your work. And that lets you answer a lot more questions than the person who is diligently doing what I've asked and is showing their work. So in all fairness, you should expect me to be just as mean about deducting marks for not showing your work on the final. In fact, there were 2 questions where this was particularly a problem, and they were the easy questions where you just had to show me that you needed to multiply X and Y. So they were question number, which ones? You guys know the ones I'm talking about, right? Questions 11 and 12. So in question 11, I told you what the costs were that you needed to allocate, and then I gave you a table with percentages in them. So all you needed to do, and I gave you an entire page, so I don't want to hear any complaints that you didn't have enough room to show me your work. So what I wanted, and I had told you guys before, was 0 times 150,000 is 0, and 10% times 150,000 is this, and this, and this, and this. And then, so on that page, if you didn't show me your work, I took 3 marks off. On the next page, most people did not show me their work on this page. I got tired of taking off half marks, so I didn't take half marks off of anybody's. However, I believe I know there was 1. There might have been 2 people who showed me their work. I gave them bonus marks. Because again, it's not fair that those people took the time to write their work down when other people didn't. And again, I realized it was a little teeny tiny table, but there was a lot of room underneath it. So on the final, I want you to show me your work. And if you don't, I'll dock marks. I think that's about all. I'm going to post the answer key on the D2L. I had brought it with me last week, but of course, then didn't give you your finals. And then I don't want to single out Jenny, although I was going to single her out anyway. She did something amazing on one of the questions, and I just want to find it. Oh, apparently it's question 6. I just want to find her answer. Oh, here. I have to mark this twice because the first time I marked it, I looked at it and she had written so little that I thought she didn't know what she was doing and she had given up because it wasn't the same answer that I had written down. But when I looked at it more closely, I realized she had gotten to the same answer that I had gotten to, but she had done it way simpler. So this question 6 is a variation of one in the textbook. I think it's actually an example in the textbook about acoustic speakers. So this is, I believe, from chapter 6. Isn't it the acoustic concept stuff? And it asks you, oh no, it's chapter 7. It tells you that to calculate the change in operating income, if the advertising budget is increased by $10,000 and results in a $25,000 increase in sales. And it talked about the advertising budget increasing by $10,000 and the resulting increase in sales. And I had told you guys that you could use $30,000. So that is what she used. But regardless, her technique is not reliant on which number you chose. And regardless of which one you used, if you'd used 25, I would have marked 25, and 30, I would have marked 30. So I think somebody went back and crossed out their work for the 25 and did 30. You didn't need to do that. I thought I said that, but I seriously mean that. If I do that again on the final, don't go back and redo the question. You don't have time for that. You know, and even if, for example, well, that's a good point. Let's say you're doing a question and you think sales are $100,000 and you get to the bottom of the paper and you realize that you had misread that and sales were $500,000, write me a quick note. Oops, screwed up, thought sales were $100,000. Please mark. I'll mark that. Just explain to me that, oh, you just made a small error. Like, don't go back and redo work for stuff like that. Just explain to me, oops, made a mistake. Please mark. Like, I'll mark it, okay? So question 6 was, calculate the change in operating income if the advertising budget is increased by $10,000. And if you go to the textbook in chapter 7, you'll notice that when we did, like if you look on page 277, for example, They talk about change in fixed cost and sales volume. Oh, look at that. This is really close to the question that I just put in your exam. It might even be this question, and I just changed the numbers. So they said that the monthly budget would increase sales by 30,000 to 130,000, and should the advertising budget be increased, and the $10,000 increase in the advertising budget, right? So they show you a solution there. It says sales volume. They say sales less variable expenses, contribution margin, which is the way that I did it in the exam solution. Then you look and you see alternate solution number 1. Expected contribution margin, 130,000 times a 40% contribution margin ratio. Well, you know how to do that, right? The contribution margin ratio is the sales price less the variable expenses, and then that gives you the contribution margin, and then you divide that by the sales. That tells you the percentage. That's the contribution margin ratio. So what they've done here is they've said the expected total contribution margin is the expected sales times the ratio, which is 52,000, and then they say that the present one is 100,000 times 40%, which is 40. So they say the incremental contribution margin, so they're saying they would make an extra 12,000. And then they say there's a change in fixed costs of 10, and the increase in the operating budget is 2,000. That is way less work than all of the stuff in the preceding one. And if you look at the alternate solution number 2, that's even easier. So that whole question was worth 10 marks. Jenny did it using alternate solution number 2 and got all 10 marks. There's only 3 lines in there, right? So when you're doing these questions, you want to make sure that you think about, is there something that I've learned, some kind of ratio or some kind of technique or some kind of, does the contribution margin per unit somehow help me here? Like, for example, on the question that I showed you to calculate the cost of goods, the variable cost of goods sold, where I just took the variable costs and I added them up and then multiplied by the number of units. That's really easy, a lot faster than writing direct material, this times 50,000, direct labor, this times 50,000, direct. So try and shorten it, like make yourself more efficient by using the stuff we're learning, right? So I gave Jenny a bonus mark for that, because it was, as I said, that was so simple and elegant, because it was. And sometimes you get wrapped up in these big, long solutions, and it's as simple as that. So back to, so like I said, I know it's hard to ask me questions when you don't have the answer key. I'll post it. Take a look at your midterms during the week. Send me an email if you want. Phone me if you want. I prefer in the evening rather than during the day, because life is crazy at the accounting office during busy season. But if you can't do it any other time than during the day, then sure. Yep.
I wasn't following when you were talking about titles earlier, and I think it was a question that you were talking about.
The customer margin? Yeah.
Is that the one where you said you had preferred that we put the name of the company on it?
Yes. Yes. If you look at the example in the textbook, are you going to tell me that I gave you too many marks?
No.
Oh, okay.
I'm challenging you on this one.
Oh, go for it.
I'm just curious why you would want the name of the company on there when earlier when we were taking the information on income statements and balance sheets and everything, you said, I don't care if you put names and dates and periods for titles and whatever.
Oh, well,
I didn't even
fair
think
enough.
Putting titles in there because.
Oh, fair enough. Fair enough. But it's very difficult. That's a good point, but it's very difficult to use a customer margin if you don't have, like, if you don't know who it's for, right? Like, if you're going to compare it between two, like, I know what you're saying. You feel like I misled you.
Like, you put a title on it, sort of, almost like you made the chart and you.
Yeah, I hear
Like,
you.
I would even see your point we had to make the whole thing up, because then at least we should make, like, write what you're doing. sort of.
That's true.
But you've made the chart and everything, and it's kind of a fill in the blank kind of graph sort of thing.
True. True. I agree with you on that concept. Let me think about that one. I'm trying to find the customer margin. Is that chapter 6? No, I think it's 5. It's 5.
It's actually not one that we covered either, like.
Oh, actually, I remember specifically saying in class that you needed to know.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah, no, I'm not saying that it
okay.
shouldn't have been on there, I did do it like in homework, I did,
Yes.
but I'm just saying it's not.
Oh,
when
that I
you
didn't
talk about
emphasize
board or
it?
something.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But I think I did,
Just one point, but I'm just-
it's a good point. I hear what you're saying. I'm trying to find the oh, here, Exhibit 186. I mean, I guess my expectation would be if I tell you to, like, I think when we talked about it in class, I specifically directed you to those exhibits for the product margin, Exhibit 513 and 512 on page 186 and 187.
Well, on 512, there is no title in it either.
Yes, there is. It's right between B and C. It says Windward Yachts,
Which one, what page you on?
186. The customer there is Windward Yachts. So I guess my logic for that was that I told you guys I'm not sure I went over these in length, but I did point you at those exhibits and tell you needed to know how to do both of those. I don't know. I'll think about it. I probably won't change my mind, but
Doing the work is different than putting a title in
it is. But at the same time, I give marks for writing contribution margin down,
it.
right?
But you told us you were gonna do that.
Well, I don't have to tell you all my secrets. I'll think about it. But I think for the final, you should assume that if I direct you to an exhibit, you should know how to use the format from the exhibit. How about that? We'll agree on that one, and I'll think about the thing. And at the end of the day, the mark probably won't matter one way or the other. Because most people didn't do it. I think only one person, maybe two, did it. So it's just differentiating those two people. Okay, back to budgets. Oh, and definitely know how to do this for the final, because you'll see something like this on the final.
Like this, what are you talking about this?
Sorry, the Chapter 8 quiz I'm putting away. The Chapter 8 quiz. Make sure you can do that in a couple of weeks when it's the final. So back to Chapter 9, and we are going to move on to the production budget, which is far more straightforward than the cash collection budget. But the cash collection budget is straightforward once you figure out what your format is. Just think, and you might even find for the cash collection budget that you want to label. So we did, oh, that's not very dark. We did, for example, January, February, and March. So January, oh, move that over a bit. So January, February, and March. So what you might want to do here to keep yourself straight is cash, sales, current month. Then you want to say credit sales. And think about credit sales from maybe November, or if they say the sales from the quarter, or if from in the next quarter, or whatever. So November, December, January, February, March. And if you do that, then you can keep yourself straight and say, okay, and then you do it by month. So you say to yourself, okay, so Did the cash sales from November happen in any of these months? No. The credit sales from November, where were they? So half of them were in December, so half of them are in January, and how many of them are credit sales? Oh, 70% are credit sales of the sales dollars from November, whatever, right? So this tells you what you need, right? And then you would say, okay, well, where are the other 30%? Or where are the other, depending on what this is. So then you can put the rest of the credit sales from November, if they go here, and then December, and budgets, and see how, depending on how your customers pay, when you need to borrow money and when you can pay back your loans and so on. And we can figure those things out, and we'll be doing that in chapter 9. So these are just ways of showing operating income, but they don't necessarily show you how much cash there is. Okay? I know, it seems weird, but. Which one do you think a bank would want to see? Well, they'd want to see a profit, right? So if you were going to look for a loan, you would probably want to show them this kind of income statement if that kind gave you a loss, right? So it would depend on your fixed. If you didn't have a lot of fixed costs, it might not make a difference, right? So it would depend. But yes, probably the absorption.
Costing was the most accepted method.
Yes. Yes, most banks would not accept a variable costing income statement.
That's what I was thinking, they would want the.
This is
they would want the
standard.
absorption. Yeah.
Yeah. But you would also want to show them that because it's more likely it would show a profit than not.
You print both.
Well, you'd probably just bring that one if it showed a profit. So, let's start chapter 9. So the next time you're doing any of those questions when you're reviewing for the final, make sure you follow the variable income format that has the cost of goods sold, like that exhibits in chapter 8. And I think they're in chapter, I want to say 6. They're in other chapters, so. At the end of the day, they're quite similar. You just, they're a little teeny changes. But yes, thank you for reminding me that variable selling and admin expenses only vary with the units sold.
Will you be giving us a copy of that, the answer?
Yes, I printed them all out, and they're clearly on my printer because I looked through my bag like 3 times, and I'm like, oh, crying out loud.
I didn't get all that.
So, sorry about that, but yes, I will, I can post it tonight when I get home, and I can bring the printed copies next week if you like, because they're sitting in my house anyway, so I'm either going to recycle them or I'm going to give them to you. So let's go to chapter 9. I just want to make sure this is actually taping. Oh, apparently so. All right. Hi, Jenny. Chapter 9. I have posted the lecture notes for chapter 9 as well as the homework on D2L. When I get home, I will post the chapter 8 solution for the quiz. And I was wondering about the chapter 9 quiz, although chapter 9 would not be my ideal chapter for that, but think about this for next week. I'll probably do a regular quiz for chapter 9. But chapter 10 is standard costing and overhead analysis. It's a really, really tough chapter. It's about variances. And that is the one chapter that if I wasn't going to give you a formula sheet, I would really be mean, because there's a lot of formulas in that chapter. So what I think I'm going to suggest, and you guys can think about it and let me know next week if you're game for that, or if you'd like to go back to the standard quiz format. For chapter 10, what I'm considering is that instead of me giving you a quiz, that you can instead do I don't want to call it a self-quiz, because that's not really what it is. What I'm suggesting to you is that instead of that quiz, you can, at home, prepare a question on the chapter 10 material. So one that you think would be similar to something I would test. And you have to prepare both the question and a solution for the question. And if
Make up the question?
you have to make up the question and the solution at home with your textbook. And it can't be one from the textbook. It can't be that. It has to be something original. And I know all the questions, so you can't fool me that way. But what?
How comprehensive a question would it have to be?
Well, you've seen the questions I give you on the quizzes. It would have to be about like that. Not that hard. Like, it doesn't have to encompass everything in the chapter. You can pick like one topic in the chapter and give me a question that would be about a 10-minute question. It probably would take you half an hour to actually create a question and a solution to go with it.
Does the winner get to be on the exam?
Sure. Yes. Yes, I might actually.
You can just take one question and just change it.
No, I know what the questions in the textbook are, so you can't do that. Because I would recognize it as a question from the textbook. So the reason that I'm suggesting that to you is because some of you I know have, sometimes you're right at the end, or or you're a little stressed having a quiz in class. So, it's up to you. If you want to do that, think it over and let me know next week. Because next week there'll be a regular quiz on chapter 9. So if you guys are interested in trying that, then you can do that for chapter 10. And I guess the other thing I could do is I could do a quiz for chapter 10, and those of you that choose to prepare your own question and solution can do that instead of the quiz. So give that some thought. It gives you more time to do it because you can do it when it suits you, and you can do it as long as it takes you. It takes me about half an hour. It would take me a lot less time if I didn't have to type it up, because it's tricky typing up numbers and they have to line up, and that's a real pain in the neck. So I guess if I wrote them out on a piece of paper and I scanned them and emailed them to the girl at the admin, but I never think of that. I'm so used to not having somebody do that for me. But, so, you guys think it would be too hard? Jury's out?
I have no idea. I mean, it's hard because we've never done that.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you have to write the question, like you have to do the questions, solve the questions in the textbook. I would think after a while you'd get an opinion about.
And if we do something easier?
Yeah, what if you think it's too easy?
Yeah.
Maybe-
Oh,
Do we
yeah.
know what? Yeah, and then you're gonna get a real variety of what.
You're gonna take
Yeah.
a longer time to.
Well, do you guys think that you all get the same mark on the quizzes? No. Generally, unless you think everybody gets 100%, which is not what's happening.
What if we write our question and then we solve it, but we solve it incorrectly?
I don't think that.
How do we ever get it wrong?
I don't think that would happen, to be honest with you, but
I do that.
if you got it wrong, then I would explain to you how to do it right. But, I mean, yeah, that'll happen. I don't know. It's just a thought I had.
You're saying something and you say it wrong and then you answer.
Well, I just thought it would be interesting. Okay, chapter 9. Well, there is some, I used to do that for a tax course that I had. And actually, the reason that I'm suggesting it is because you actually learn more trying to explain it to somebody else. And when you're writing a question, and you have to make sure that all the correct pieces are in the question. So for example, when I wrote on the board that you had to assume the beginning and ending WIP were 0, if I hadn't solved the question, I wouldn't have known you were missing that piece of information, right? Same thing if I hadn't given you the direct material cost, right? When you go to do the solution, you're looking for that piece of information and you're like, okay, we actually need something that you didn't give us. So the whole process of writing your own question actually helps you learn that concept better, because you will think you write down something and then when you try to solve it, you'll realize you forgot pieces. And so that'll just reinforce it. It's just a thought. You don't have to do it. But if there's a concept that you're really having trouble with, I would recommend you try that, because you will learn it better. Okay, so budgeting. Page 350. The definition of a budget is it's a quantitative, so that means it's actually something with numbers that you can quantify as opposed to a description of something. And it's used for forecasting what is going to happen with the business in the next future time period. That could be a month, it could be a quarter, it could be a year. All successful businesses budget. No one runs business that doesn't have some idea of what they're expecting to sell and produce and all that kind of stuff. You simply can't run a viable business that way. They talk about budgetary control. So the budget is the piece of paper that says we expect we're going to sell this much, therefore we need to make this much, because at the end of the day, how much you produce is driven by how much you expect to sell, right? You don't manufacture to the capacity of your equipment and then hope to sell it all. I mean, that's not the way a viable business works, right? A viable business forecasts their sale and then manufactures to be able to produce what they need to sell, because idle inventory that's unsold is in danger of becoming obsolete, broken, damaged, all kinds of bad things. So they have a number of definitions, and I think there's some that I've skipped. So on page 350, they talk about a master budget, and a master budget it's a vast, big, huge thing. And through chapter 9, we're going to talk about schedules, and they're basically little mini budgets that go into this big master budget. So a company will have a master budget that indicates their projection of sales, their expectation of cash flow in and out, their expectation of production, all kinds of things. So that all together is called a master budget. So it says in the dual role planning and control, good planning without effective control is time wasted. So there's no point in planning unless you try to control that you actually meet that budget. If, for example, I budget myself to spend $150 a month on work clothes. If I then go to the mall in next month and I spend $300 and then I spend $300 the following month and the following month after that, my budget is not much of a budget. Like, it's telling me that I've allocated $150 per month, but I'm not following it. I'm not checking to see why I'm spending $300. Like, are clothes just that much more expensive than I budgeted, and so there's no way I'm ever going to meet that $150? Am I buying things that aren't necessary for work, and so that's why I'm spending $300? So a budget in itself is not it's a means to an end. It's a way to accomplish something, but you have to control you use that budget to control your activities. It's not a thing in itself. So there is a list of advantages of budgeting. That's a useful list. I might ask you some kind of concept questions about that, but it wouldn't be, like, don't memorize this list, but it's a good list. This, point number 2, for example, says budgets force managers to think about and plan for the future. In the absence of the necessity to prepare a budget, many managers would spend considerable time dealing with daily emergencies. So budgets help them think about the future and what they need to plan for, and that helps the business run smoother. You should know what a bottleneck is. There's a definition on 351. It's anything that limits total output. So if, for example, you have a factory that can make 50,000 somethings, and there's a point at which those somethings have to go into a box, and you only have one box folder, and the box folder can only do 10 boxes a minute, then that's your bottleneck. If you can whip more than 10 boxes a minute to the box folder, that's your bottleneck, right? So one of the things that companies do is try to identify their bottlenecks and then deal with them so that they don't constrict output. So you should be aware of that definition of a bottleneck. Responsibility accounting is a good concept, but I don't imagine that I would ask any kind of exam question on it, so read it. Continuous or perpetual budgets, I don't need you to know about that, so you can skip that. Just be aware, it says on the bottom paragraph on 351, and you don't need to write this down. In this chapter, we will focus on 1-year operating budgets. That's the way that this chapter is going to be, so in any kind of a question, I'll be specific about the type of period that we're talking about. Just like in this question, I said for the month of February. So the beginning was February 1, the ending was February 28. It should be clear on any question I give you. And if, for example, on the exam, it comes to the point where you're doing a question and you don't know something, for example, like what period does this cover, and you can't figure it out from the way I've worded the question, make an assumption. And all you need to do is state what your assumption is. So if, for example, something wasn't stated like opening whip, like for that question, if you're convinced you need to know that and I won't answer your question because I think you should know the answer to the question, then just put assume whip beginning and ending whip is 0. And then just use this number in your things. Because at the end of the day, I don't want you to spin your wheels stressing or thinking about, I think I need that number, I can't find it, where is it? Just make an assumption, say what it is, and just move on, okay? Because as you know, it's not the number that you get that's important, it's the process. So on page 352, they talk about a participative budget. I won't use that term, but again, very nice to know. I won't be asking you questions about that. Budget committee, you can skip that. Skip 354, 350. Okay, when you get to 355, you may skip the zero-based budgeting at the top only, because the real meat of this chapter starts on page 355, the master budget overview. Okay, so that's kind of where we're starting, although you should know those other terms that I highlighted. So on 355, the master budget overview, they're going to talk to you about the different, they call them here separate but interdependent budgets. So they all have something to do with each other, and one will cascade into the next, and we'll go through and show how that works. So all together, they are the master budget, but they're all these little individual ones. So the very first one that is always dealt with is the sales budget. And that's because sales drive everything, right? You need to know what you're gonna sell to be able to know what you need to produce. So the very first one of the master budget is the sales budget. And you need to be able to produce any of these budgets. Unless I tell you that I'll never ask you to produce one, you should be able to produce one. So there are about, I want to say 8 or 9, but we'll get to that. So the very first one is the sales budget. And don't be too stressed by the fact that I'm going to tell you have to produce all these, because some of them are very straightforward. A couple of them are trickier. So the sales budget